This is CityCast Pittsburgh. I'm Megan Harris, and here's what Pittsburgh's talking about. Julia, if you were in charge of revitalizing downtown, it was your game, what would you spend money on first?
Ooh, first. It's hard because I feel like we've already done so much in front of the draft. There's been like so much done already. But I think we need more like really interesting, quirky, unique, like destination kind of businesses. I feel like we have a good mix of businesses down there, but we need things that are like going to attract you from the suburbs, that you're going to come down for just that one shop or that one like best in the city coffee place.
Okay. Coffee, I get. Give me an example, though, like in any neighborhood, a quirk that you will travel the city for. You will cross a bridge.
For me personally, it's coffee and bookstores. I don't know if that's hitting a wide enough population. But if I were just designing downtown for myself, we need more bookstores. We need more coffee shops. Always, everywhere.
And I feel like they've been on the coffee shop game, but bookstores, I feel like we could do a little bit more in that space.
Yeah, I think there's one now. But like we need more, and we need like the quirky ones that are really unique and interesting and have like old antique books or unique events, things that are like really going to drag me down there out of my, out of all of the other neighborhoods, drag you down there. I feel like I can only get this downtown.
Okay, origin story, ruckus, all hands, defer. If yins are listening, we love you all, but we would love to have a bookstore next door too. If you're hearing this and you can help them with that, please do.
100%.
I am with the Trib's City Hall reporter, Julia Berdelsky, to hopefully unpack a proposal that City Council is supposed to talk about today. But it's been on various agendas for months now. It comes up, it goes away, it gets deferred. It's called a Transit Revitalization Investment District, or TRID, and it could be worth hundreds of millions of dollars over decades. People who like it say it could be a once-in-a-generation investment tool, but the people who don't say it's basically robbing from two neighborhoods to help pay for another one. So, Julia, make it make sense. What is a TRID?
Yes. So a TRID is basically a tax diversion program. What the TRID proposes to do is take all of downtown and then a chunk of the North Shore and the Strip District, and say any new development or redevelopment in those areas over the next 40 years, they were going to take 75% of that new tax revenue and put it into a fund to invest more in downtown. So instead of all of that tax money going back to the city, the county, and the school district, it would go to revitalizing downtown. There has to be some transit because it's a transit revitalization investment district, but it would go towards other things too.
Like what? Like what could it pay for, including transit? Like how does that work?
On the transit end, to start with, we've talked about potentially Pittsburgh Regional Transit seeing some perks. There aren't specific projects necessarily that they've lined up yet, but...
No, because this is still the proposal phase where they just want money and they'll figure out the details later.
Exactly. It's still very early, but I think we could potentially see things like improved bus shelters or maybe some additional work on the university line, things like that maybe could benefit from this. But outside of transit, we could also see, say you have a big development that is going to take empty office space and convert it into residential, but they need a loan to kind of fill their financing gap. Maybe this money comes into play there, or maybe there's some sort of public realm improvements. We're going to fix up a building facade, or maybe improve some green space outside, fix up some sidewalks, things like that.
Yeah.
Those could all kind of apply. But like you said, this is really early stages. So exactly where the money would go is still pretty foggy.
And it's hilarious to hear you say it's early stages because this has been part of the O'Connor administration. So really since the beginning of this year, council has brought it up and then tabled it for a while and then it comes back up. But like some counselors have made this like a real battle cry, like this is a good thing or this is a terrible thing. And I feel like what I'm also reading between the lines sometimes with your stories, Julia, is that some counselors don't seem to understand how it works.
It is
or they're trying. It's really confusing.
It is. And I will say to the defense of some of those council members, this one's a little bit quirkier than some of the other ones that we've seen because...
You mean previous TRIDs?
Yes. They call it the value capture district, which is the area where you actually kind of take the money from their tax revenue. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't line up with the same area that money is being invested into. So like we're taking money from redevelopment, downtown, Strip District, and North Shore, but we're only putting it back into downtown. And I think that's caused a little bit of confusion because normally we're looking within the same geographic area. So I think that has maybe caused.
Yeah, it's apples to apples.
Right. So this is a little bit more apples to oranges. So there are just like some interesting little kind of quirks to this one that I think maybe are causing some of the confusion. But as you pointed out, like we have had TRIDs before. This exact same city council has taken these issues up. These same council members, they just approved one for the Esplanade project in the Chateau neighborhood not too long ago. So it's interesting to kind of hear them rehashing it and trying to learn about it all over again.
But I think you got at something else there. Like, it's not just that it's quirky, it's that it's also like kind of controversial to take from one neighborhood and then not let it benefit that same neighborhood. Like, what is the reasoning behind that?
It's interesting because that's part of the controversy. And I think even taking a step back, we can say tax revenue generally benefits the whole city. Like it normally goes to the whole broader 90 neighborhoods, not just I pay my taxes here in Brookline, so my taxes go back to Brookline, right? Like it goes to the whole city normally. So this is interesting because the concept behind it is basically saying downtown is the core of our city. This is the big economic driver. We rely very heavily on tax revenue from downtown. And so they're saying we need to, even though it means we're not getting all of that money for the rest of the city, we need to plow cash into downtown, to revitalize downtown, to make sure downtown remains fiscally stable and healthy going into the future. It obviously was hit hard by the pandemic. So the thought process is take that money from downtown, the Strip District, the North Side, that portion of new tax revenue from all of those areas, focus it into this one area that we care about a lot that needs help right now. And the hope is that eventually in 40 years when this is over, downtown will be stabilized, downtown will be healthier than it is now, and we will be making more tax revenue off of it because of these investments. That's what proponents of this plan are hoping we will eventually get out of this plan. But there is, of course, that short-term hurt of having to divert all of that money and invest it into just this one small section of the city now.
Yeah, it just seems like a really big bet to make, just because like downtowns struggle. Like they are indicative of like every problem that can befall a city. Often it hits downtown first, just because everything is larger. The buildings, like the bets that people make on their types of investments. It just is that a thing that works? Has it worked somewhere else?
It's interesting because I think that when we look at this as like a post-pandemic solution, we're still kind of early. It's only been like 5 or 6 years, and these are projects that take longer than that. So I know that the URA has talked about some other cities who have tried similar approaches. I think it's probably a little too soon to say whether they're long-term solutions or not, because we've only been kind of toying with this for a couple of years. We know we've obviously tried a handful of different approaches already to downtown. Some of them seem like they have had some positive impact, at least. Some of them maybe aren't going quite enough. I think it just kind of depends, but it's sort of early. I will say that, we know the URA has done TRIDs before and they view them as having been successful. They've never had to like default on a loan from any of this or anything, catastrophic with a TRID per se. But this one is, like I said, it's a little bit different. It feels a little bit different to have the kind of geographic mismatch between where we're gathering money from versus where we're putting it into. A lot of them are tied to a specific development like we saw with Esplanade. This isn't quite that. This would potentially be spread out amongst a bunch of different developments and developers. So it's a little bit of a different approach, and I don't really know that we'll know for sure how successful it is until or unless they try it.
I mean, why 40 years? That seems like just such a long runway. Like at that point, you're spanning maybe a dozen mayoral administrations, like depending on how the chips fall and who runs for office.
I think part of the reason is just development is slow. And so if you make it, say, 10 years, you're really limiting, especially if you're looking at big developments, the number that can go through the pipeline. You kind of have to give it, I think, a little bit more of a runway. But yeah, I mean, 40 years is obviously a long time, and some council members have raised that. I think the maximum allowance for a TRID was set by the state. So this is something that state officials have kind of approved up to that timeline.
Oh, so 40 years is the max.
I believe it is, yeah.
Okay.
But it's interesting because I think that is one of the kind of questions is like, do we need to do it for such a long period of time? Is there maybe an in-between number that some council members would feel more comfortable with if 40 seems like too long? I mean, this is taking 75% of new additional tax revenue from redevelopments in that area. And 75% is a pretty good chunk. So it's not biting into the tax revenue that the city already gets, but it's, taking a really good portion of all of the new tax revenue. And that's not just for the city. It would also be for the county and the school district if they sign on as well. So it has a pretty big impact. And doing that over 40 years, I think, is part of why some people are feeling kind of nervous, because that's a really long time and that's a really large commitment. But I think proponents are saying you have to give it that space to make sure that you give developers time to work and that you have time to make those investments over a longer period of time, because as we all know, development is not something that happens overnight.
It takes forever. Yeah.
Especially if you have, big developments, like I think they're hoping some of these will be, they're not necessarily just talking a little facade improvement. They're talking, these giant, massive buildings. We're going to completely redo them. And that takes time.
Yeah. No, the facade improvements we did before company came for the draft. Now we need to do all the work behind that.
Mm-hmm.
Today's episode is sponsored by YWCA Greater Pittsburgh. They're currently accepting nominations for the 2026 Equity Awards, which honor community members who support their vision of a world where everyone has equitable access to professional and personal opportunities free from injustice. There are 5 award categories: Ally, Bridge Builder, Creative Arts and Innovation, Emerging Leader, and Heroine. Nominations are going to be accepted through Friday, July 24th. YWCA Greater Pittsburgh also encourages self-nominations and especially wants to recognize women of color. So if you or someone you know has been stepping up for your community, this is the perfect opportunity to honor that work. And honorees will be recognized at the Equity Awards Luncheon on Thursday, November 19th at the Westin Pittsburgh. Learn more about the awards categories and submit your nomination today at ywcapgh.org.
Well, so let's talk about some of those critics. I know you have been doing the Lord's work, going to 1 million public hearings. What are people saying that gives them pause? Big things, small things, whatever.
Yeah, I think there are a couple different things, and it maybe kind of depends on what each individual's focus is. One of the things that I've heard that I think is interesting is there are a lot of transit folks who are saying this isn't transit oriented enough. And if you're going to do a TRID, they want to see much more money earmarked for specific transit projects, as opposed to allowing a sizable chunk of this money to go towards other kinds of development projects. So we've heard that. We have heard concerns, as you pointed out, about just the duration of it is 40 years too long. We've heard concerns about the fact that there would be money from the Strip District and the North Shore going into downtown. Is that fair? Is that equitable? More broadly, all 90 neighborhoods have needs, all 90 neighborhoods need investment. Is it fair to take a chunk of tax revenue and put it only towards downtown? Some people say no. And I think, kind of touching on what you mentioned with beautifying downtown for the draft, I think some people feel like downtown has already gotten so much attention recently. We had this big renovation of Market Square. We just installed Arts Landing. We saw a lot of these beautification projects, and not all of our neighborhoods have seen that. So maybe there's a little bit of jealousy, for lack of better words. My neighborhood deserves some of this too. Why aren't we getting it? So I think all of that plays a role. But then there's also, I think, the question of, this is taxpayer money. This is money that would otherwise go into the city's, the county, and the school district's coffers. Some people, I think, are really uncomfortable with the thought of it going to support private development. And that's something that we hear in different iterations all the time when we are seeing taxpayer money going to development. But Councilwoman Warwick in particular has said she's really uncomfortable with the thought of putting money towards housing developments that don't include affordable housing. Could there be additional parameters? She's asking to say there must be affordability or there must be some sort of public benefit. So I think that's part of it too, is just who stands to benefit most from this money, and is that what the taxpayers would want?
I feel like that's the piece that I've been kind of a through line I've been seeing in a lot of your reporting, but also just how people talk about this on the internet. It's a lack of specificity about what projects would ultimately receive funding, what those parameters would be. And also who gets to decide, say you approve this. I understand council gets to decide that piece, but then once it's in place, who's in charge? For 40 years, who does all of that decision making? I know it's it's a group, but it's just, that's a lot of responsibility to divvy that out over time.
The Urban Redevelopment Authority will ultimately oversee this. So
Right.
their board has elected officials on it, but it's not an elected board. So it is a step removed from having city council hand out taxpayer money or having county council or the school board hand out taxpayer money. There is that's kind of step back from this not being a purely elected board. And I think that makes some people uncomfortable.
And the URA does a great many things, but one criticism that I've heard over the last decade or so is that sometimes it's not clear what they're doing, that it's difficult to keep tabs on the many, many projects that they are in charge of already. And that's before you add on something like this.
And I think, too, just when you have something as complex as this, it's not always easy for the public to understand it. And so even when there is information coming out of the URA or coming out of the city or wherever it is, I think oftentimes people want more specificity or people want things kind of broken down in more easily understood language.
TRIDs are not easy to understand, especially not this one.
And I think, though, that kind of only exacerbates these concerns, right? Like there are questions about the details of it, but then there's also sometimes just it's hard to understand. People sometimes maybe misconstrue it or think that it's something that it's not, or they worry that it could be abused in certain ways. And I think that sometimes when officials just assume everybody understands how a TRID works, that doesn't help. I know we heard people in public comment who seemed to maybe think that developers got to keep a portion of the tax money, and that's not quite how it works, but I could totally see how you would think that if you're just kind of skimming through these really dense materials. And so I think that part of it is also just making sure everybody understands what the TRID does and does not do what projects could or could not be part of it. I think that's still part of the hesitation. And it's really hard when you're in such an early phase like this and we don't have those level of details. Maybe some of the people who oppose it would actually love some of the projects that would get money. And maybe some of the people who support it would hate some of the projects that would get money. But we don't know because we don't know what those projects are going to be yet.
Well, and I feel like most of what I've seen to this point it's coming out of council. Counselors or folks going to public hearing, public comment, things like that. But Allegheny County and Pittsburgh Public Schools and Pittsburgh Regional Transit all have to sign off on this too. Are those entities talking about it yet? Like, are they cool with diverting this money?
I know that the URA at least briefed Pittsburgh Public School Board members on this. Typically, the city votes first, and then we kind of go through the process. So I think that we'll see what city council says first, and then I'm sure that each of those other entities will have deliberations. They'll have their own public processes. I think that all three taxing bodies, the city, the county, and the school district, are facing serious financial challenges right now. So that's going to have to be a factor, I think, for all of them to say, can we afford to see some future tax revenue diverted? But also, can we afford to potentially let downtown continue to struggle and not bring in tax money? So I think that those are all still conversations that they're going to have. I don't imagine it's going to be a super easy decision for anybody. It's a pretty weighty decision, and it has pretty long-term ramifications.
Is downtown struggling that much? Like, I feel like for a couple of years, it was like story on story on story about how these major high rises were like winning their battles in court to lower their tax burden. But then the draft was coming and they needed to like flip the script so that like we only say nice things about downtown. Look how pretty it is and look how much we're doing. Both things can be true. But when I think about like how downtown's doing right now, just like as a person who lives here, I have drank the Kool-Aid. Our office is down there. Like, I think it's pretty great as it is. Of course, everything could be better. I understand how they have like a little bit of like a PR issue where they've had two different like messages out there for the last few years. And now they have to marry them to get like assuming that, downtown leaders want this thing. Now they have to make that make sense to like regular people or at least to council.
I think you exactly hit it. I think both can be true at once. And I think both probably are true at once, that there are good things happening downtown and there are problems downtown. The downtown property tax revenue continues to drop. We're seeing buildings come in with lower reassessments. Part of that is because of office buildings emptying. Part of this is problems with the common level ratio and the need for a reassessment. And that's a whole other conversation that is also very complex.
We'll try to explain that one on a future one. Common level ratio is going to be the death of every reporter in Pennsylvania.
But, those are real problems, though. And I don't think that the city is fully out of the woods on those problems yet, just based on what we're seeing with, the city struggling to get downtown tax revenue. We know that is really important revenue for the city because it is a very large chunk of the real estate tax money that we bring in every year at the city. And obviously, Pittsburgh is facing really serious financial concerns. So I think every dollar and cent matters at a time like that when the city is looking at potentially $20 million plus in a deficit. Again, this year, we had a deficit last year. So I don't think that we can dismiss the fact that there are concerns about the financial stability of downtown. But at the same time, like you mentioned, there has been a lot of money already poured into downtown. We saw a lot of investment before the draft. There have been some promising signs. I know the Pittsburgh Downtown Partnership has been updating us pretty regularly on vacancy rates and office returns and, retailers. And they're painting a pretty positive picture. I mean, it seems like there are a lot of trends that are going the right way. But I think that there's probably an answer that falls somewhere down the middle where we can say, good things are happening, bad things are happening. We need to keep building on the good and try to reverse the bad. It's hard because I think that there are competing interests and competing visions. And maybe part of the question, too, is, what is the ultimate vision for downtown and what's the metric for success? How do we know that we're happy with where downtown is now? I don't think everybody would have the same answers to those questions.
Yeah, I don't even know who the arbiter of that would be. Obviously the downtown partnership cares, like City Hall cares, but I mean, a lot of people care. But I don't know who gets to decide, like, we're good now. We're done.
I mean, maybe there's like a dollar and cents figure where we say downtown property values are no longer declining. They're maintaining steady or they're going up. Like maybe there's like a physical dollar and cents metric that would be a fair way to look at it.
Or like a number of like buildings that are like inhabited, that their space is being used in some way. Yeah.
Because I mean, there are hard and fast data points that we can track, but there are a lot of different data points and some of them paint a better picture than others. It just kind of depends, I guess, on what you want to focus on.
I mean, are there clear battle lines at this point? Like people that are firmly for, people that are firmly no?
Definitely. We're starting to see some of that come up. I think based on just the conversations council has had so far, it seems like, Councilwoman Warwick and Gross have very serious concerns about the TRID. We've heard Councilwoman Warwick push back a lot, but then there are other council members who are firmly for the TRID. Councilman Charland and Lavelle sit on the URA board, so they've already had some votes on this and they've been supportive. So I think we kind of know where they stand. There are others who seem maybe a little bit more in the middle. I know Councilman Coghill had some initial concerns, but now he says he's on board with it. So maybe he just needed some additional information or wanted to learn more. But I think that there's still room for some more debate. I don't anticipate that this is going to be an easy conversation when it comes up at council again. I imagine that we're still going to hear them kind of hashing out what works best. I wouldn't be shocked if there's a request for some sort of amendment or another hold to discuss further. I know Councilwoman Warwick had suggested, are there provisions we could tack on that would address some of the questions and concerns that seem to be most problematic for the public. I don't know whether she would have the support for that or not on council, but I think that there's still some room to debate for sure.
Yeah, I mean, council has 9 members, and if I counted that correctly, you said 3 for, 2 against. That leaves 4 votes up in the air for now.
Maybe. I mean, it's hard to say because I think, this is one of those topics where we've seen some council members who haven't expressly said, I'm going to vote for it or I'm not going to vote for it. Sometimes you can kind of hear by the tone of their questions or some of their comments.
Julia, you can hear by the tone of their questions. You are a council interpreter. Not all of us are.
But I will say, even as someone who watches often, sometimes you'll have a council member who asks some really tough questions and then says, yeah, I'm still on board. And, that's fair. Maybe they just wanted more information. But I think that, we're seeing from some of them, kind of signaling, we have questions, we wanted more information.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, a little bit hard sometimes as well, just as they're deliberating when maybe their opinions aren't fully formed yet. Maybe they're still trying to get more information during some of these meetings. It makes it a little hard sometimes to predict exactly where they'll go. And like I said, I think that there was some desire at least to maybe explore additional guardrails or additional amendments. And if that would happen, that can also sway who's comfortable and who's not comfortable. So it's a little bit up in the air still.
Any sense of the timeline of all this? Because part of the reason we're talking about it is because you and I both heard that there may be some speakers this morning in council about the TRID. Judging by the folks who told me that this is coming, I'm guessing at least a few of them are going to be against this thing.
Yeah.
Do we know when to expect something, some kind of movement?
So at the fastest, and this is still not that fast of a process, but at the fastest, council could take a preliminary vote Wednesday, and then the following week it would come up for a final vote. But even if that happens, that does not put the TRID in place instantly. It still has to go to the county and to the school board. They will have weeks-long processes. They'll hear from the public. They'll debate it. So even on that quicker timeline, we still have a ways. But there's also a chance that council decides to hold it, that they want to consider additional public feedback, that they have other questions that they want to send off to the URA, that they want to explore amendments. Like there could be pauses even on that process. But as with development, TRIDs don't move quickly either. So there will definitely be plenty of opportunity for members of the public to continue asking questions, giving their feedback, all of that.
And if this doesn't pass, if we have all this discussion and they decide it's not for Pittsburgh, not right now, what happens then? Do you have a crystal ball idea of what the next step or next move might be for folks who are worried about downtown?
I really don't. What's interesting about the TRID is you have to get all three taxing bodies on board. It sounded, based on some questions that were posed to the URA at a recent meeting, it sounded like if any one of them stepped out, that would really throw the whole TRID into jeopardy. All of the estimates on cost and economic feasibility, they were all based on all three taxing bodies being on board. So that's a question. Even if Pittsburgh City Council approves it, if the county or the school district says no, it would really be back to the drawing board on the TRID. We've seen a lot of other efforts already for downtown. Obviously, the governor came and he had that big $600 million downtown reinvestment plan. We've seen,
which I still maintain was creative math because you're counting a lot of things that already existed, but that's how politicians work. It's fine.
Fair enough. But yeah, we had all of that. We've had, incentives for downtown conversions, making empty offices into residential. We've seen a lot of different efforts already underway. I imagine that, especially if the TRID doesn't work and we're kind of back to thinking of other ideas, perhaps officials would want to build on some of those. I'm sure that some people have other creative ideas up their sleeves, but it seems like one of those things where there has been no end of different possibilities for downtown. There have been so many things already pitched. A lot of them are still in the works. Maybe the answer would be to double down on some of those efforts or to expand them. Obviously, with the TRID underway, I think it's hard to know for sure, because I think a lot of people who are really worried about downtown right now are really trying to just emphasize what they see as the benefits of the TRID and trying to push that across the finish line. So I think that's where a lot of the focus is, at least while that's still on the table.
Well, Julia, we are talking to you early in the morning before council meets. Thank you for keeping tabs on all of this. I know that if anything does pop off, you are going to have it for the TRIB. So we appreciate you. We will keep linking to your work in our newsletter. I don't know, just so grateful that someone like you is keeping track of all the things.
Oh, thank you. And thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure.
That is all for today here on CityCast Pittsburgh. If you want to support us, you can do that at membership.citycast.fm. We will be back tomorrow morning with more from around the city. We'll talk to you soon. I'm telling you, night owl. If we could do interviews at 10 p.m., I'd be so much better off.